And I do think that the world of therapy is beginning to change and we're bringing technology in, but it is new for most of us still. And the PhysioCam can feel really different when you first bring it into your setting. I think at one point when I was using it and was actually doing a demo with someone and it was right there next to me and it made me think, oh, I have it's like a third nervous system in the room with me. It was my ally in working with this. And then on my client's end, I think my client felt the same. I think my client felt like, oh, this is like a tool that's with me, is going on the journey with us together. So in that way, it feels very integrated into rather than a distraction from. And I think that's often the worry in the beginning that clinicians have, that it's going to, be a distraction from the deep work we do in therapy rather than a way that can deepen that work. So I want to put that out there first, that it really does feel like it's a partner with you in the work you're doing. I think even as we use it with clients, the first few times it's novel, it's new, it can pull our attention as the colors change and as we're trying to sort of figure out together what that color change means. And then after that, it often can fade into the background and it's just there doing its job. And then we can bring attention to it as we want. And sometimes, it will catch our attention and then we're curious, right? But again, it feels like it just becomes built into the therapy work that we're doing. I think the data that we get then invites us to become curious because we want to not interpret the data without joining our clients in that exploration. So I always, think we're trying to explore with our clients, not explain to our clients when we see the data that comes from the PhysioCam, because the same data, a change in color, a change in heart rate variability may for one client mean they're moving out of a place of regulation into a survival strategy. And for another client, it may mean that their vagal brake is releasing and they're still in that place of feeling regulated enough to continue. They're diving more deeply, they're more engaged. So just looking at the data is only the first step. I then need to talk with my client and say, what's happening in your nervous system? Because we're seeing this change. So we want to be careful not to make an assumption about the data. And yet the data is a wonderful addition to the intuition that we therapists all rely on so much. It's as if I often think the data is sort of bringing that nervous system into, it's illustrating the nervous system. And then I can think, oh, what is my clinical wisdom telling me? And then I check it out with the client. And most of the time I'm right. Some of the times I'm absolutely wrong. And I think that's the staying humble that is really needed for we therapists. And it is interesting. We do live in this world that is filled with data and numbers. And I'm going to answer that, again, it's a yes and, right? I think for many, many clients, our experience has been that seeing the data, seeing the color changes, having that capacity to notice what's happening inside is reflected by what's happening objectively out here is very reassuring and affirms that what they are feeling, what they are sensing, and what they are then thinking is in fact true. And I think especially for trauma survivors, that is a powerful moment of feeling witnessed, feeling seen and heard, and feeling as though they can trust what's happening inside. Those are all the experiences for trauma survivors that are so vitally important for healing. I think for, people who are it's a less complex presentation, but a client who is, simply coming to work with, finding their way through the world differently, that they're having trouble navigating, they're pulled into survival more than they want. They have trouble finding the way back to regulation. Again, the seeing the colors change on the PhysioCam display is a powerful recognition that their nervous system is moving, right? That what they are feeling is being represented by color change. Then we can explore, what is that color change, saying to you? What's your nervous system trying to tell you? But the color change is an illustration of that communication that's always happening. And I think one of the things that's been so fascinating is as we can see the nuance of color change, clients really feel, oh, there's the subtlety of change, right? We feel the big changes. We all feel the big changes. So we might feel a big, experience inside, and it's represented by a big change, on the PhysioCam output, what you see. And yet it's the small changes, the nuance of change that happens that we see represented in the slight color changes. That is really important to track and fascinating for clients to see and feel. Fascinating as a clinician for me to be tracking, because I know I can see, I can intuit certainly as I feel, but sometimes the nuance of change is so subtle that it's hard to track. And it's so fun to see it represented on the color change, because I know, oh, right, change is happening, that this movement is happening. So as we get ready to, dive into that question, I do want to say that I think it's really important when you begin to use the PhysioCam to have a good basic understanding of Steve polyvagal theory, the three organizing principles, right? We need to understand how the nervous system works and what neuroception does, the hierarchy, because that's really what we're seeing. We're seeing the physio is representing movement down and up the hierarchy, and co-regulation, right? Because our nervous system is impacting the client's nervous system. And, somewhere down the road, we'll just throw it out there that it's a hope of mine that, therapists in training, or even, therapists who are just seeing clients, are seasoned therapists, that there'll be two PhysioCams. There'll be one for the client and one for the therapist, because that's what's happening. The two nervous systems are having that conversation. So that's down the road somewhere, but just putting that out there. So, back to your question, how do we interpret, the data? And I think it's really important to be careful how we interpret the data. The physio has colors, and at some point, because of your amazing technical abilities, people will be able to choose colors. At the moment, they're the fairly standard, red and green colors. And I think in our human experience, we associate red with bad, green with go, red with stop, or red with overwhelm, too much, anger, and green with okay, right? And the colors change on the physio, and yet red does not mean stop. If my client, moves into the red zone, it does not mean they're getting dysregulated and ending up in a survival state. It does not mean stop. It means be curious. Because as you said, the vagal brake, we're looking at vagal efficiency. The vagal brake may be releasing, relaxing, so that there's more engagement, more sympathetic energy in the system, but they're still under the influence of ventral. There's still neuroception of safe enough. They're still regulated enough. They're engaged. They could be excited. They could be really focused intently on whatever we're working on. And that's where we want them to be. They're stretching their nervous system. So red does not always mean stress. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And that's the beauty of working with the nervous system, is it invites you to then explore, right? What's happening? Where are you right now? What's your nervous system telling us? And I think that's the joy of any kind of nervous system work, but of seeing the physio in action, right? Is that I might have a thought that, oh, we just headed into the red. Maybe I'm going too far, too fast, too deep. And maybe I'm not. That's the beauty of it. You can just be curious. And that then engages the client in a conversation. And part of the byproduct of using the PhysioCam is what I call the client's ability to befriend their nervous system, right? I'm not making an assumption about what's going on. I'm saying, let's explore. Let's listen to your nervous system. What does it need us to know in this moment? Right. And again, we look at points in time, but really what we want to look at when we're working with the nervous system is points over time, right? We're looking at shifts over time. Yes, I might stop in this moment and notice in this moment, I am feeling too much sympathetic activation. And that's helpful to know. And then I can look around and say, what were the triggers that got me here? Even more helpful is to look at that pattern across time. How did I get here? How do I get out of here? To see a pattern across time. And that's really what the physio is giving us. It's giving us movement, right? It's not set points in time, but movement. So we can see as we are moving into this piece of work, how's the nervous system responding across time? I mean, notice and name is for me where everything begins. We have to bring the implicit experience of the nervous system into explicit awareness in order to work with it, in order to partner with it in our work. And so that's notice and name. I think, as we're seeing the color bar or the color cue giving us a way of seeing what's happening, it's like we're looking inside the nervous system, but it's out here and it's coming to life in color, right? And whether it's staying pretty much in the same color flavor, or whether it's moving between color shades, right? That's information for us, and we can stop and notice and name any of those. It's not simply when it changes that it's important to notice and name it, but also, when it's staying relatively stable, notice and name that, because it's all information. And I think, one of the things I'm always saying to clients and to colleagues when I teach is that the nervous system is always trying to communicate with us. And our job is to learn how to listen, right? Well, this is one of the ways we can learn to listen. We can listen by watching, because the nervous system through the physio is communicating to us through this beautiful, sometimes large and often subtle color change, right? So we notice and name that, and then we can, I'm probably, as I'm looking at my client's color bar, I have a thought about what it might mean. I need to be really careful and keep that as a thought, as a curiosity, and then ask my client, right? Did you notice what's happening with the color bar, right? Let's notice that. And, you know, what's happening inside you that's being represented there. Notice a name for yourself. And then I can check and say, yeah, we were on the same page. Or sometimes I might say to a client, I'm glad you were able to really, share that with me, because I was going in a different direction. Right. And I think it's fascinating for us to get that ability to have that feedback. I think when we talk about feedback as well, sometimes having an external way of looking at it. So the color cube, the color bar, the colors changing as sort of I can be here observing is easier. As a client, it's easier to see that and say, oh, yes, right? Sometimes it's an outside in. I see it there and then I can bring it in and go, oh, right, I can track that. Sometimes it's an inside out. I feel something here and then I notice, oh, and then the physio begins to change color. Both are important pathways, right? Outside in, inside out. Both are really important pathways. And the physio, we've heard and seen, does both. Right. We go there all the time, don't we? We make meaning in this way. So one of the things that I think is really helpful to do is to, sort of see all of the colors that the physio can give you, the variations on the theme of red and green, and then invite your clients to give varieties of labels to red and green. Right? Sometimes red means, yes, I'm now in a survival strategy. So red might mean anxiety, might mean anger. Red might mean excitement. Red might mean engagement. Red might mean focused, right? So if we, take red and then give a whole range of labels to red, I think that's helpful. The same with green, right? I think it's helpful to broaden, because we love categories. We humans love to think in categorical ways, right? And yet continuum thinking is really what we're looking for. So there's a continuum of labels for red, a continuum of labels for green. And part of the clinical, intervention around this is creating those with your client, right? Is to feel, okay, when do you tip from, really focused and working hard to over the line? That's a stretch, which is good and could be read on the physio, into a stress, which means too much and could be read on the physio. So it's this lovely, invitation again to really tune in, and physio is giving you cues to do that, right? I guess the other thing I would say before we, you know, move on to another topic is, I think it's so important as a clinician beginning to use the physio to use it for yourself first, right? I think we get to know a piece of equipment not by, testing it on clients, but by using it on ourselves first, and maybe find a buddy, so that you can be the client. What does that feel like? You can be the clinician. What does that feel like? Right? In the polyvagal world, it's what we always say. We say, get to know your nervous system and how it's responding first. This is another opportunity to see, oh, where are my strengths and where are my challenges around bringing the physio into my clinical work. And one of the ways to know that is to be in the position of the client and what it feels like, and where, have how you would explain it, how you would bring it in, and then try it as a clinician. Find a buddy who wants to, try it on for size and play with it a bit. So that would be my invitation in the beginning to new clinicians. And, just to say, for anybody who's watching, we have all done this. We have people who are the most seasoned clinicians, in the therapy world, even, for me, it is so important to test it out, to try it, to say, oh, I didn't know what to do in this place, or, that felt really not okay, or that felt really great. That's how we learn. So try it on for size and play with it yourself first. Thing that I was doing a demo of the PhysioCam to a group of clinicians, and I felt the responsibility to make sure that it worked and that people saw the value of it. And if anybody who's listening who knows the nervous system could feel, as I'm saying, that there was a sympathetic drivenness, there was a sympathetic have to make this happen in my nervous system. And I was doing this with a dear friend who's also a clinician. And so she's then trying very hard to show up because she knows how important it is to me. And you can imagine what the physio was doing, right? It was showing our nervous systems being dysregulated. It was showing her not being able to come to regulation because my nervous system was demanding. There was a demand being placed on her. And, we did this for a little bit and then just sat back for a moment, took a breath and said, this is not working. Right. And she's a dear friend, so I could say that, but we get that with clients too all the time. Wow, something is not working. And I could take a breath, and I could come to recognize, oh, I'm really not anchored in regulation and safety. And I could find my way back to that place. And from there, I could then offer to my friend's nervous system that sense of invitation rather than demand. And you immediately saw it change on the physio. It was a beautiful example. Not my best moment, but it was a beautiful example of co-regulation or thinking we're regulated as a clinician. Oftentimes we go into a session, we have an agenda. We know, or we think we know what should happen, what needs to happen for our client, right? In this case, it was I felt a pressure to perform for all of the people who have created physio and were depending on me, right? And you can see immediately the nervous system response, right? So it's a beautiful example of the power of co-regulation, the power of not being fully anchored in ventral, and what happens when you can come back there, right? You could see it on the physio, you could feel it in the room. It was beautiful. So I do think that, in some ways, as the physio changes color, we as a therapist are looking at, what am I contributing to? How am I making this safe enough for my client to be able to do what they need to do? Again, coming back to, I still think it would be lovely to have, my own physio and my clients, because in that moment, we only had one back then. If we had had two, it would have been easier to get there. I would have gotten there a lot faster because mine would have been showing, the too much, right? I had to play around with it for a while before I went, wait a minute, something's not right, and take a step back. But I do think that that data that comes, that illustrates, it is an efficient way to get to the next step. It's an efficient way to know what's the next question to ask, right? I think we'll get there. I think the clinical application now is ready to go, and I think people are going to find it really useful. I think clients are going to love it. I think clinicians are going to find it such a helpful tool that they're going to wonder, what they did before, right? And it's not in place of. Your clinical intuition is incredibly important. This is not taking the place of that. It's adding to it. So it's an add-on rather than an instead of. I want to say that. And then I think for many clients, because part of what we know about clients who are working and really longing for change, they're suffering and they want to change, is that they want to feel like they're doing something between sessions. I had clients ask me all the time, what can I do? Right. And so one of the things that could be something they could do would be to engage with the physio, right? To use it regularly, to find a regular time, or to say, oh, I want to, here right now, I'm feel like I'm struggling, or here right now, I feel like I'm, really in a flow, and use physio for either one. It's not just to track dysregulation, it's also to track the flow of safety and connection. And I think the watchword we would say as they were going to do this is, you'd have to really make sure with your client that they could stay out of making meaning, or assigning motivation, or making a, a story about red and green, or blue and yellow, or whatever the colors are going to be for them, right? That there's that tendency to say, oh, I couldn't get out of the red, right? And to make a negative story about it rather than being curious about it. So I think if we build in enough of that sort of platform, then I think clients could really benefit by working between sessions. And then I'll just, take a leap here around into the world of curious humans. I also think that if we found a way to have the right sort of, introductory program, and learning about what the physio is showing you as it's changing colors, I think people not in therapy could really benefit from the technology as well. right? I mean, look at everybody who's wearing something that's showing them something about their nervous system, right? And I say that because I don't know sometimes what it's telling me about my nervous system. You get numbers, you get this. I think people are fascinated by that. I think it can contribute to more well-being. And I think, down the road that may be where the physio can really be of service to curious humans. It's fascinating because when the pandemic hit and we all moved to online sessions, the vast majority of us had no idea how to do it, right? We ended up doing Zoom sessions or even phone sessions or sessions without being in the room with the client that we never thought were possible. And come to find out, it could be actually very effective, which is a lovely thing to now take forward, right? That because many people are still doing virtual sessions. I think for me, as I moved to virtual, if I was with a client and we had done all the groundwork around getting to know their nervous system, it was easier because again, I can only see you from here up. So I have no idea what the rest of your body is doing. And I get fewer cues because I can't really feel into your energy. Right. So there were fewer cues. And for clients who were new, and I didn't know their nervous system at all, it was an interesting stretch to try and get to know their nervous system. I think the physio as a color bar that's running, down the side of the screen or across the bottom, wherever, you decide you want to put it, that's showing moment to moment the nuance of change in the nervous system gives us a wealth of information that we can then engage with our client in being curious about, right? It's going to give me a shortcut to getting to know their nervous system in the beginning because you're seeing changes and you can then stop and notice, oh, I noticed that, we just went from red down to a little bit more green. Let's stop and identify what were the conditions that helped that to happen, right? Same thing we do when we're sitting with someone, only now we're doing it with the benefit of a changing color bar that's helping us with that. I think clients are curious and they can begin to track because it's right there. And I love it because it's there, but it's not there, right? It's on the side or running across the bottom. So it's there enough so that I can see it whenever I want, but it's not so much in my face that it, is distracting me, which is lovely. And yes, I think that it adds a nervous system dimension that you don't get otherwise, right? And again, I probably am a broken record, but it feels like it's an addition to, right? It's not instead of. I still need to get to know you and your nervous system. And this is helping me do that more quickly, more efficiently, more accurately, right? So I want people to really feel like this is not a replacement for your clinical skills or your own nervous system intuition. This is an addition to a deepening of that experience. Oh yeah, let's think about that because I think when people see the PhysioCam, they're drawn to it and want to pick it up and start using it. So there's that pull to want to use it. And I really believe that you need to have a good foundation in understanding how the nervous system works and understanding polyvagal theory, the basics of polyvagal theory, so that when you then use the PhysioCam, you understand what the nervous system is trying to tell you, right? It's a different way of looking at what's happening. It's different from the clinical practices we've been trained in. It's a listening to what's underneath the cognitive story and staying out of our own cognitive explanations and looking underneath to what's happening in the nervous system and being curious about what the nervous system is trying to tell us. So it really is a stance of understanding neuroception hierarchy co-regulation, and then being curious about, in this moment, what is the PhysioCam trying to tell me? I don't think you need, hours and hours and hours of training. You don't need to take long-term immersive training, but you really need to do the foundational training so that you feel comfortable both understanding what physio is communicating and communicating to your client what's happening in their nervous system, and helping your client begin to understand, here's what's happening in my nervous system, and here's how physio is bringing that to life in a session. That's an interesting thing to think about. I had not thought about that, and I think my answer is yes, and it seems to be the answer of the day. Yes, and yes, I do think that it could be really interesting to bring co-regulation to life and see it and play around with. I could envision myself, playing with the physio and having somebody be my demo client and playing around with ways that I might interact with that client, and seeing, in a co-regulating way, seeing what the physio has to say about it with that client's nervous system. I think it would be fascinating to experiment with and see. So you could get to know co-regulation, you could get to know your ways of offering co-regulation and see what felt welcome to that other nervous system. You would see the hierarchy. You would see a client moving through the hierarchy. So again, I think, get a test, a friend who wants to be a test subject with you, and play with it, and see when dysregulation happens, what happens in the physio, when there's a vagal brake relaxation, but still saying anchored in safety, what happens with the physio. You could really get to know the hierarchy that way. And neuroception, those cues of safety and danger, you certainly could see play out. You could play around with changing, what's coming at a nervous system, what's happening in the neuroceptive world, and see what happens in physio response. And as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, I think I want to do this. I think I want to go play and see what happens, right?